It remains one of the most humiliating radio transmissions ever recorded during the Vietnam War, March 1968. New Dat Airstrip. A veteran U.S. Army Green Beret captain stood watching something he could not believe. Inside a dusty Australian garage, a team of SAS soldiers were deliberately destroying their own weapons. At least, that's how it looked to him. Hacksaws bit into steel as precision-manufactured rifles had their barrels brutally shortened. Sparks flew. Metal fell to the floor. The American laughed. Turning to his men, he said, "Look at those idiots. They won't last a week." 6 hours later, he wasn't laughing anymore. He was pinned down in dense jungle, surrounded by Viet Cong fighters, his company being systematically destroyed. He was screaming into his radio, calling for help. And the only people coming to save him were the idiots with the sawed-off guns. What happened next didn't just save his life. It embarrassed the U.S. military establishment so badly that the evidence was classified, buried, and quietly ignored for years. To understand why, we have to go back to the garage where the sewing began. On March 14, 1968, an American intelligence officer stepped off a Huey helicopter at the Australian base in New Dat and instinctively covered his nose. Smell hit him immediately. It was layered, aggressive, biological, rotting vegetation, stagnant water, decomposition, and something his mind could only label as advanced human neglect. This man had spent 18 months in Vietnam. He had seen burned villages, mass graves, field hospitals overflowing with wounded. None of that prepared him for what he was smelling now. 40 meters away, Australian SAS soldiers were preparing for patrol. His first assumption was logistical failure. His second was discipline breakdown. No professional military, he believed, would ever allow soldiers to reach this level of filth voluntarily. He approached and eyed Australian lieutenant to offer hygiene supplies. The response he received stayed with him for decades. The smell was not failure. It was doctrine. And it was one of the main reasons Australians came home alive, while Americans came home in aluminum boxes. The U.S. Army believed cleanliness was discipline. Every American soldier carried soap, deodorant, toothpaste, shaving cream, insect repellent. This mindset dated back to World War I. Clean soldiers were professional soldiers, but the Viet Cong had learned to exploit it, captured enemy fighters, repeatedly confirmed that American patrols could be detected by smell alone from over 500 meters away. Deodorant left chemical trails that lingered in humid jungle air for hours. Insect repellent contained compounds completely alien to the environment. American cigarettes with their sweet Virginia tobacco announced patrols from nearly a kilometer away. The jungle never forgot. The Australians erased every marker. 2 weeks before a patrol, SAS troopers stopped using soap entirely. No deodorant. No shaving cream. No toothpaste. No commercial tobacco. They ate local food. Fermented fish sauce. Indigenous diets that altered body chemistry. By insertion day, they smelled exactly like the jungle: rot, mud, decay. The results were terrifying. Viet Cong patrols passed within 2 meters of Australian positions without detecting anything unusual. In one verified 1967 incident, an enemy fighter stepped directly on an Australian trooper's boot, looked down, saw only jungle debris, and walked on. The trooper never moved, never reacted, never breathed visibly. Then there were the rifles. The American intelligence officer noticed immediately something was wrong. The barrels were too short. Someone had taken a hacksaw to the Australian L1A1 self-loading rifle, a variant of the FNFAL, one of the finest battle rifles ever built. Accurate to 400 meters. Reliable. Respected worldwide. Australians had cut nearly 15 centimeters off the barrel. Removed flash suppressors. Welded crude forward grips from scrap metal. To American ordnance specialists, it was sacrilege. Ballistics ruined. Range destroyed. Professional standards violated. The Australians didn't care, because in Vietnamese jungle, visibility wasn't 400 meters, but it was 10 to 15 meters. Long barrels snagged vines. Bamboo. Undergrowth. Every snag meant stopping. Every stop meant noise. Every noise meant death. The shortened rifles slid through vegetation like snakes. Long-range accuracy didn't matter. There was no long-range. And at close range, the 7.62 millimeters round devastated. It punched through bamboo cover. It stopped a man instantly. The American 5.56 millimeters M16, often DIDN, single quotes T. In dense jungle, it wounded. Viet Cong fighters sometimes continued advancing for seconds. After being fatally hit, Australians didn't wound. They ended the fight. Then came the sandals. Australian troopers wore sandals made from old car tires. Ho Chi Minh sandals. Enemy. Footwear. Tracking was a primary Viet Cong skill. American jungle boots left distinct tread patterns. Numbers, direction, time all readable. Australians erased that signature. Their tracks looked like friendly movement. Viet Cong trackers followed them without suspicion, sometimes straight into Australian ambushes. They walked in streams, stepped on roots and rocks, brushed out tracks. The hunters couldn't track them. But the biggest shock wasn't equipment. It was mindset. Americans used words like Charlie, Victor, and worse. The enemy was considered primitive, inferior. Australians called them Mr. Charles. Not mockery. Respect. Enemy tactics were studied. Successes analyzed. Capabilities acknowledged. Australians assumed nothing. And because they never underestimated their enemy, they survived. American Doctrine valued speed. Australian SAS moved at 100 meters per hour. Americans thought it was a joke. Until they watched it. One step. Freeze. 4 minutes of absolute stillness. In 30 minutes. 4 men moved 50 meters. No sound. No disturbance. Birds kept singing. Insects never stopped. At that speed, the jungle forgot they were there. They weren't hiding. They were invisible. 6 days later, Doctrine collided with reality. The 173rd Airborne 118 Elite. American paratroopers walked blind into a reinforced Viet Cong battalion. The enemy heard them. Coming from over 300 meters away, the ambush was PERFECT L-shaped, automatic. Weapons. RPGs. American artillery and gunships responded exactly as Doctrine demanded. None of it worked. Prepared enemy positions. Absorbed everything. By 12:30. Over 40 Americans were down. At 12:51. The American captain made the call. He begged the Australians for help. Australian patrol 4 men moved. At 100 meters per hour. Toward the Americans. Through the Viet Cong. They used battle noise as cover. Sent discipline to remain unseen. They passed within arm's reach of enemy fighters. At 14:27. They were inside the enemy perimeter, 35 meters from battalion command. The Australian sergeant began calling artillery not guesses, but precision. First round. Enemy command post destroyed. Second. Heavy machine gun silenced. Third. Withdrawal route sealed. Fourth. Ammunition point detonated. In 18 minutes. The battle was over. 4 Australians. 0 casualties. Captured Viet Cong documents later revealed the truth. Against Americans, Ambush aggressively. Withdraw before artillery. Against Australians. Avoid contact. Do not pursue. Do not ambush. Withdraw immediately. They had a word for them. Rung. Jungle. Ghosts. But there was a price. Becoming invisible meant becoming something else. Hypervigilance didn't turn off. Stillness followed them home. Some never fully returned. Ghosts don't belong to one world. The methods worked. The evidence existed. The Australians tried to teach. Institutions refused to learn. Lessons were adopted decades later quietly, without credit. But in the jungle, the numbers were always known. 1 casualty. 500 enemy. Not luck. Adaptation. Patience. Becoming what the jungle required.